This piece is called The Blank Apartments. I won't say anything else about that. The doorbell is ringing. I've never heard the doorbell ring before. When I say doorbell, I should say doorbells. The doorbells are ringing all throughout the building. A school of notes that once rang at the same pitch, but sound different now. Not only because their sounds are jangling toward me from different apartments, upper and lower floors, rooms that share a common wall with mine or are diametrically opposed like the finger holes at either end of a Jacob's ladder, but also because sounds age differently. Or rather, the apparatus ages and reveals its degree of decrepitude through its sounds, be they springing or garrulous or barely limping along. The fire has had an impact. Some of the bells rasp like voices destroyed by thousands of cigarettes. Some bells must be entirely dead, as there are blanks in the volley of sounds. Pockets of silence that hover like questions in the otherwise unthinking cacophony. Or else the person ringing the bells is consciously altering the rhythm, inserting bursts of silence in odd places to surprise the listener. I'll try not to be so fancy. The listener is me. There is no one else. If I admit that much, will other things become clear? Probably not. There are already so many evasions in what I've said here. The word bell, for instance. Obviously, the truth is that any apartment building with more than a few units is going to have a system of buzzers rather than bells. Not only is the sound of a buzzer considerably more abrasive than that of a bell, even an electrically simulated bell, the word itself is unpleasant to say, bringing to mind buzzards, which brings to mind death. Not death in the abstract, those blank end caps which frame a life and reportedly give it meaning, but death in the particularity of its physical breakdowns, death as an announcement via stench, death as dinner bell. Right now, though, there's another sort of announcement happening, a bedlam of bells, buzzers, bantam cocks crowing crazily, whatever one wants to call them, they won't be stopped by naming. Some other action is required. A person is ringing the doorbells. I have no idea who that person might be. I open my door and creep downstairs. The only footprints in the soot on the stair landings belongs to me, and there aren't very many of them. It's not often that I leave my apartment, and the soot is like dust, falling constantly, though invisibly, filling my old tracks. The man ringing the bells wears a long black coat with the collar turned up, and a black hat, perhaps a fedora that has lost its shape. I can't make out his face. Behind him, in the light from the streetlight across the street, it appears to be snowing. He's turned slightly away from me, facing the grid of doorbells, punching at them with the naked tips of his two middle fingers, but in rapidly deteriorating order, as if he is losing hope. As I watch him through the glass, trying to determine if he's some sort of buzzard drawn by my stench, he gives up, lets his arms fall to his sides, and leans his cheek against the panel of buttons, depressing several of them at once. The sound of all the bells together above me is like a roof of light going on in my brain, a deeply pleasurable sensation. It's been a while since my brain has been lit up. I must make some sort of involuntary movement, an electrified swoon, because the man's head jerks away from the panel. He straightens up and peers into the dark vestibule. He sees me where I stand hovering between the second to last and the last stair. I feel caught, and though fearful, I quickly remind myself he is the one who is at my mercy. The face at the window is slack and empty. The flesh hangs from it in sad ropes, the lips sag in a default pout, The muscles of his cheeks seem barely able to lift up his chin, which is pocked like a golf ball and covered with several days' hair growth. In that moment, I think he is perhaps the ugliest man I have ever seen, and my heart opens up wide as it goes, which, having had little practice, is not so wide at all. But then the man smiles, and his face is transformed. Primate confusion is replaced by intelligence, sly wit, and, what may have been there all along, a brooding sexiness around the eyes. I don't know what to think. I allow myself to smile back, tentatively, and commit more fully to being on the last step and leaving behind the second-to-last step. He responds to this encouragement by deepening his smile to the point of making dark furrows in his cheeks and leaning slightly backward to raise his shoulders in an open-armed shrug. Also, he mouths something, or this is how it appears through the glass. More likely he is speaking aloud in an exaggerated way that if I were a lip reader I could understand, but I do not understand. I continue my tentative approach, stepping across the vestibule, which is covered with scraps of old newspaper and ash. Later he'll tell me that he thought he might be seeing a ghost, that the hairs stood up all over his body when he saw me, but that might have been from the cold. And I'll tell him that I myself have sometimes wondered if I'm a ghost, and was a bit surprised he could see me, and that more than half my surprise may have been gratitude at being seen. Our faces are very close now, closer than I would dare get to a face that wasn't behind glass. The rules of proximity are funny that way. I remember a dancer telling me once about the unspoken etiquette between dancers. He said it was considered impolite to make eye contact with someone while you were holding them close, that when your bodies were doing something intimate, it was important to allow for the necessary distance provided by foregoing eye contact. For a long time I thought about this whenever I was having sex with someone, and it was a balancing act I could maintain as long as we did not look at each other too intensely or for too long. The reverse seems true as well, that when there is some barrier, some physical impossibility, eye contact becomes primary, becomes both the asking for and the granting of certain permissions that, if spoken, would be unbearably intimate. His eyes are dark and long-lashed. One has a red scratch in the white part, like half a parenthesis enclosing his iris, the asymmetry of which unnerves me. So I quickly look to the other iris, unflawed and opaque as a cup of black coffee. I love coffee. I push the door open a crack. It's quite heavy, and I have to lean with all my weight to get it to move at all. What? I say. Cold air rushes through the gap. I feel it on my breastbone and realize I'm still in my slip. Why didn't I at least grab my bathrobe? And then I remember it burned last month beyond repair. I forgot my keys, the man says, and shrugs again. Thank God you were home. Oh, I say. My voice sounds to me like one of the cigarette-smoking doorbells, rough from disuse. His hand reaches for the brass door handle, which he holds just firmly enough to take the weight of the door off my shoulder, widening the gap by an inch. Almost involuntarily, I step back from the cold air, and he opens the door and steps through it. Brr, he says. Now that we're in the same room, I can't look him in the eye. Though the door is closed now, I can still feel the cold air emanating from his coat, which reeks with a peculiar odor. I didn't know anyone else lived here, I say. I'm in 5B, he says. That's the apartment next to mine. Well, he says, off to bed, giving me one last grateful shrug, and turns to start trudging up the stairs. What can I do but follow him? He coughs a bit from the smoke as if he's not used to it, and I think about confronting him about this, but I don't. The coughing makes him seem terribly vulnerable, and again my heart opens with a squeak like a bank vault door opening, like when I thought he was ugly, which already seems like a long time ago. When we get to the 5th floor landing, I see with horror that I've left my apartment door open, and I wonder what I would do if he decided to walk right in and wait for me there, but he doesn't. He walks past my open door to the one next to it and makes a show out of fitting his key into the lock, jiggling it around, then finding the sweet spot where it turns easily and says, "Ah." Before he shuts the door behind him, he turns to where I am standing, staring at him. "Well, good night," he says. "Good night," I say. I have a new neighbor. Or else, I have always had a neighbor. Which of these statements is true, I have no idea. Thank you all for coming.